The shimmering, pale green cloud of aerosolized silver nitrate expanded with terrifying speed, hissing like a nest of disturbed vipers. Even within the protective shield of Killian's massive arms, Vivian could feel the caustic vapor scraping against her throat. Her vampire lungs screamed for pure air that didn't exist in the contaminated chamber. Killian didn't hesitate, carrying her with a raw, supernatural strength that defied his recent injuries. He lunged directly into the ancient, collapsed tunnel at the very back of the catacombs. The tunnel was a treacherous maze of jagged rocks and rotten wooden supports, forgotten by the university for over a century. Behind them, the sounds of the Silver Vanguard grew deafening. Heavy tactical boots thudded down the breached ceiling, accompanied by the distinct, mechanical whir of automated tracking drones entering the subterranean space. Thermal signatures detected. A hunter's voice echoed through the comms, amplified by the narrow stone walls. They're moving into the old drainage vectors. Deploy the tracking hounds and load the silver-tipped hollow points. Move, move, Killian set Vivian on her feet the moment they cleared the immediate radius of the gas cloud. The air here was damp and smelled heavily of stagnant water and decaying earth, but it was free of the lethal silver vapor. Vivian stumbled slightly, her vision swimming with dark spots as her body worked furiously to purge the trace toxins she had inhaled. Her violet eyes flared in the darkness, locking onto Killian. The Alpha stood at the mouth of the narrow passage, his chest heaving, his crimson eyes scanning the deep shadows ahead. They were deep beneath Blackwood Valley now, entering a network of tunnels that held secrets far older than the university itself. "Can you run?" Killian asked, his velvety baritone dropping to a tense, hurried whisper. He didn't look back at her, his entire focus dedicated to the sounds of the approaching hunters. The distant, frenzied barking of specialized tracking hounds began to echo through the stone corridors, a sound that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. "I've been running for 200 years, Wolf," Vivian hissed back, her voice laced with defensive pride despite her shaking knees. She straightened her posture, pulling her dark cloak tightly around her body to prevent it from catching on the sharp rocks. "Just make sure your oversized paws can keep up." A low, brief rumble of amusement vibrated in Killian's chest, but the humor was instantly cut short by a sound that made them both freeze. It wasn't the hunters. It was a low, rhythmic clicking sound, vibrating through the very stones beneath their feet. It sounded like hundreds of tiny, skeletal fingers tapping against the wet rock, moving rapidly through the parallel fissures in the walls. Vivian's heightened senses picked up an entirely new scent, something ancient, stagnant, and deeply unnatural. It wasn't the wild, living scent of a lichen, nor was it the static stillness of a vampire. It was the smell of animation without life. The Blackwood tunnels weren't empty. They were the resting place of the whispering dead, cursed remnants of the valley's first settlers who had been driven underground centuries ago. The violent intrusion of the hunters and the potent spill of supernatural blood had awakened them from their long stasis. They were trapped between a heavily armed human army and an army of the undead. The frenzied barking of the Vanguard's tracking hounds grew louder, accompanied by the bright, sweeping beams of tactical flashlights cutting through the winding tunnel behind them. The hunters were moving fast, guided by the thermal spikes left behind by Killian's radiating body heat. "We need to move, now," Killian growled, grabbing Vivian's hand. The contact was an instant shock of warmth against her cold skin, sending a jolt of energy straight to her core. They took off into the dark, their supernatural speed turning the jagged stone walls into a blur. The clicking sound in the walls grew louder, keeping pace with them, a terrifying shadow army moving just beyond the stone veil. Suddenly, the tunnel opened up into a massive, cavernous chamber. High above, ancient root systems hung down like skeletal tentacles, and the floor was covered in a thick layer of ash and bone fragments. Before they could cross the chamber, 3 massive tracking hounds burst from the tunnel they had just exited. These weren't normal dogs. They were cybernetically enhanced beasts, their jaws reinforced with silver plating and their eyes glowing with an artificial, synthetic blue light. They didn't bark. They lunged, their mechanical jaws snapping with terrifying force. Killian reacted instantly. With a fierce roar that shook the loose dust from the cavern ceiling, he stepped in front of Vivian. His hands shifted into massive, fur-covered claws as he caught the lead hound midair, slamming it violently into the stone floor. But the remaining two hounds circumvented him, their glowing eyes locking onto the vampire girl, their silver jaws dripping with synthetic saliva. Vivian didn't back down. The fear that had kept her hidden for 2 centuries dissolved, replaced by the cold, lethal instinct of a pureblood predator. As the first hound lunged for her throat, she moved with blinding speed, vanishing from its line of sight and reappearing directly above it. Her obsidian claws extended, slicing clean through the cybernetic components at the beast's neck. The hound collapsed with a shower of sparks and a high-pitched mechanical whine. The third hound snapped at her flank, its silver-plated teeth grazing the fabric of her cloak. Before it could bite down, a massive red-furred shape slammed into it. It was Killian, fully embracing the partial shift of his alpha form. His muscles had doubled in size, his jaw extending to reveal rows of razor-sharp fangs. He tore the final hound apart with a savage, primal fury that was both horrific and deeply mesmerizing to watch. The chamber fell silent again, save for the ragged breathing of the 2 supernatural predators. Killian stood amidst the mechanical wreckage, his crimson eyes wild and unfocused, the alpha bloodlust taking over his senses. He turned his gaze to Vivian, his chest heaving, his posture tense as if he couldn't distinguish friend from foe. Vivian stood her ground, her violet eyes glowing brightly in the dark, her own fangs bared. The magnetic pull between them intensified, a dangerous current of raw power that threatened to consume them both. "Control it, Killian," she said softly, her voice carrying an ancient authority. "The hunters are still coming, and the walls are waking up." Her voice seemed to cut through the red haze clouding the Alpha's mind. Killian blinked, the wild scarlet in his eyes receding back to deep crimson. He let out a long, shuddering breath, his body slowly shifting back into his human form, though his claws remained extended. "You fight well for a librarian," he murmured, his voice laced with a dark, respectful appreciation. "And you destroy things well for a dog," she retorted, though there was no real malice in her voice. Their brief respite was shattered as the clicking sound inside the walls reached a deafening crescendo. The stone surfaces around the cavern began to crack and crumble. From the fissures, skeletal hands wrapped in rotted burial clothes began to claw their way into the light. The whispering dead were pouring into the chamber by the dozens, their empty eye sockets glowing with a faint, ghostly green flame. They didn't breathe, they didn't speak, but a collective, psychic whisper echoed through the minds of the 2 intruders. A demand for the living blood that had disturbed their rest. At the same time, the main squad of vanguard hunters entered the far end of the cavern, their heavy weapons raised. The lead hunter took one look at the massive chamber, seeing the vampire, the alpha wolf, and the rising army of the dead. "Open fire," the commander shouted into his radio. "Target everything. Use the incendiary rounds. Burn this entire sector to ash." A barrage of white-hot phosphorus bullets tore through the air, illuminating the cavern in a blinding, horrific display of fire and violence. The incendiary rounds struck the advancing undead, causing them to explode into brilliant flames, but the sheer volume of gunfire was turning the chamber into a death trap. Bullets ricochets off the stone walls, spraying jagged fragments and sparks everywhere. Killian grabbed Vivian again, shielding her from a stray burst of fire that scorched the back of his jacket. "There's an underground river at the edge of the ledge," Killian shouted over the deafening roar of the gunfire and the shrieks of the burning dead. He pointed toward a steep, pitch-black drop-off at the far side of the cavern, where the sound of rushing water echoed from the abyss. "It's a drop of at least 100 feet into solid rock vectors." Vivian protested, her violet eyes wide with calculated panic. "We don't know how deep the water is. It's either the river or we stay here and get turned into silver-coated Swiss cheese," Killian replied, a fierce, reckless grin touching his lips despite the absolute terror of their situation. He locked his crimson eyes onto hers, his grip on her waist tightening. "Do you trust me, Vivian?" The question was absurd. He was a Lycan, an enemy, a creature she had known for less than 24 hours. But looking into his eyes, surrounded by fire, death, and the encroaching hunters, she realized she didn't want to die anywhere else. "Don't make me regret this, Wolf," she whispered. With a final, powerful push, Killian lunged off the stone ledge, dragging the vampire girl with him into the dark, roaring void, just as a massive explosion tore through the cavern behind them.